Obandes. He filed the story. It was published. He thought it was finished. Then the letters began arriving, from readers who recognized the woman, who had their own encounters with her, each one adding detail to something he thought he had finished reporting, until the final letter, from someone who had been in the house the same afternoon he was, who had seen him, and who had a question about the woman he interviewed that only she could answer. Find chapter 127 first. If you have not yet been to that house, it is time for chapter 157. Some stories do not end when they are published. The journalist had thought this one would, had thought that the particular strangeness of that afternoon, the tea still warm, the woman at the table, the death record dated 73 years earlier, would resolve itself into something he could file and move past. It had not. The story had been published. Readers had found it, and some of those readers had their own relationship with the house on that street, their own afternoons, their own cups of tea, and had been waiting, without knowing it, for someone to write the story that would give them a place to send what they knew. The journalist had filed the story 3 weeks after the interview. His editor had published it with some skepticism and considerable interest, the kind of story that generates reader response regardless of whether anyone believes it. The response had been significant, more than the journalist expected, emails and letters arriving through the publication over the weeks following. Most from readers sharing their own experiences with houses like the one he had described. The general category of the impossible domestic encounter. He read them, filed them, did not follow up on most, until the letters began arriving that were specifically about that house, on that street, in that neighborhood, from people who had been there. There were 7 such letters over the course of 2 months, each one from someone who had visited the house, or lived near it, or passed it regularly, each one adding a specific detail that the journalist had not included in his published story, details that would only be known to someone with genuine knowledge of the house. The woman at the table, the tea, the particular quality of the room. One letter described a detail so specific, an object on the table that the journalist had noticed but not written about, that he sat with it for a long time before responding. He began corresponding with the letter writers, building a picture of the house's history that the death record had only begun to suggest. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here and that you intend to find your way back. If you have a story of your own, Granny is always listening, watching, waiting. The 7th letter arrived 3 months after publication, different from the others in tone and in what it contained. The writer described arriving at the house on the same afternoon as the journalist, had stood outside for some time before entering, had seen him arrive, had watched him go in, had waited outside while he was there, had seen him leave, had then gone in themselves. The woman had been at the table. The tea still warm. A second cup, the writer noted, already placed, as though expected. The letter described the conversation that followed, longer than the journalist's, covering different ground, and then asked a question about something the woman had said to the journalist specifically, something the journalist had not published, something the letter writer should not have been able to know she had said. Shak Koi, reading that line, cold in the way of understanding that the story had never been about him. I wonder if you published a story and the letters that arrived afterward contained details you had noticed but never written down. How many letters before you went back to the house? If you have a story of your own, this quiet room has space for your experiences too. Granny is always listening. He went back to the house. Of course he went back. The street was the same. The house was the same. He knocked. No answer. He tried the door. It opened as it had before. The room was as it had been. The table, the chairs, the quality of light through the windows. The table was empty. No tea, no woman. Simply the room. He sat in the chair he had sat in before, waited. The afternoon light moved across the floor in the way afternoon light moves. Nothing else happened. He left after an hour, stood on the street outside and looked at the house, took out the 7th letter, read the question again, the question he did not have the answer to, the question that only she could answer, and thought about the second cup of tea, already placed as though the visit after his had been expected. You are still here. Good. Some stories need a witness all the way to the end. I wonder if someone wrote to you with details about an experience you had but never published, would you want to know how they knew? He wrote back to the 7th letter writer, asked how they had known what she had said to him, the specific unpublished detail. The reply came 2 weeks later, short. The writer said they had not known, had simply asked what seemed like the natural next question after their own conversation with her, and that the question they had asked the journalist was the same question she had asked the writer before they left, as though it were something she was working through, something she was asking everyone who came to the table, working toward an answer through accumulated conversations, with the particular patience of someone who has considerable time in which to keep asking. The journalist has not published a second story, told me he is still corresponding with the letter writers, still building the picture, still waiting to understand what the question is for. Some interviews take longer than others to conclude. I have had a few that are still ongoing. I think about the woman at the table, about the tea always warm, about the second cup already placed when the 7th letter writer arrived, as though the visit had been expected, the conversation planned. About the question she is apparently asking everyone who comes to sit across from her, working through accumulated conversations towards something, the patience of it, the methodical quality of someone who understands that certain questions require many perspectives before the answer becomes clear. And I think about the journalist who thought the story was finished when it was published, who has learned, across 3 months of letters, that the story was the beginning of the research. and the research has a long way still to go. Another whispered story from Japan, shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you published a story about an impossible afternoon in a house on a specific street, and the letters that arrived afterward contained details you had noticed but never written down, write back to every one of them, because the picture they are building together is larger than any single afternoon. And the seventh letter, when it arrives, will ask you a question you cannot answer, that only she can answer. And you will go back to the house, and the table will be empty, and you will sit and wait and leave without the answer, and you will understand, walking away, that you are now part of what she is working through. One conversation among many, one perspective added to the accumulated picture, one more person walking away from that house carrying a question they did not bring with them, and will carry for considerably longer than they expected. If this story stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting. And if you wish others to find their way here too, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. I would not object. And if you have a story of your own, this quiet room has space for your experiences too. Granny is always listening.